So we have our next event, like this is the second event, from last month. We want to like have at least for one event per month. So we certainly have another meeting like in next month. Next month, we might change the location, but we don't know sure right now. This is our schedule, we're going to talk about introduction about the cert management, and then we have a 15-minute break, and then Samuel is going to talk about BLoC, and then Jhin is going to talk about Riverpod. Yeah, that's it. This is our code of conduct. Big thanks to Unity and Google for sponsoring this event. Google for the pizza and Unity for the place. The bathroom is over there if you want to use it. Our GDG Montreal Flutter, we created a community in Montreal. What I mentioned, like we want to have a meeting every month, and maybe what is this? And maybe we want to have some open source projects. Like one of guys mentioned that if you want to like have a side project in Flutter, you can join our Discord server and let us know. And in Discord server that we created recently, we have general channel to like talk about everything, anything you want to mention. We have a showcase channel to let other people know about your Flutter project that you are working, or even your professional project that you are working in a company. Let us know about your project and we will see. We also have other channels, I guess Stack Overflow. If you have any question or anything related to Flutter, you can ask, and anyone who might know, they can answer you. And then we recently created a job channel. You can like post your job offer, or if you are looking for a Flutter job, you can simply like send a message to let other people know. And we also want to have a plan to like match the people like based on their experience for the Flutter to the job offers. So let us know about that if you have a opening job position. These are our speakers. Ali and me is Samuel is over there, and Jhin are going to talk about the state management. Our next event will be on next month for sure, but we have other events under GDG Montreal, which the next one is 26th of April. It's a counseling conference that you might be interested and you can join it. It's in Montreal. We also have Google I/O Extended. We're not sure about that we are going to have an event for that, but we let you know about the Google I/O Extended. And the next month, also we have the Flutter event. We also, again, looking forward for the speaker, organizer, or contributor. If anyone wants to help us to organize the meeting, just let us know again. And you can also scan the QR code to fill out the survey. I think this for the, not right now. Okay, let's go for the first presentation. Okay. Our first presentation, we're going to introduce you about the state management in Flutter and why we need a state management, what we do with that, and what's our requirement to use a state management. we're going to talk about as basic level to like gradually like talking more as Jhin and someone wants to have talking about the state management with BLoC and Riverpod. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about widget estates. What are the widget estates in Flutter? What is inherited widget and what's that for? And then talk about why we need a state management. And then one of the simplest state management is a change notifier. And then the simple one is the provider, which is suggested by the Flutter team. And then talk a little bit about design pattern and architecture. This slide is for our previous events, like in Flutter we use a declarative framework. What is the declarative? Declarative is like you put your state as the input and you have a build function method and you get your UI with your build method. And what's the difference between the imperative and the declarative? In imperative way, something like Android, Kotlin, iOS, and many other frameworks, you have to transit your UI one by the methods. Like, for example, if you want to change this state from the data set, you have to first set color to the red from the, yellow. And then like you have to clear children, and then you create a new view C, and then add the C3. But in the declarative way, you put your UI as in the function of the build method, and just you don't need to worry about the changing transition and everything else. You need just put your state and the current state of the UI and get your output as a UI. So, for example, if we have an animation opacity, which is a widget from Flutter, you just use the first opacity like, for example, 50%, and just, if you want to like change it to the 100%, you can just change the variable and you're good to go. You don't need to change anything else. Our framework does it for you. This is the declarative way of the UI, so it's much better, and the burden of the transition and everything, the calling function is not for the developers. They are done by the framework. The first widget set we want to talk about is a stateless widget. A stateless widget is suitable for the immutable state. What is immutable? Like if we have a static state, like we have a frog here, which gets a color, which is the green color, and then it's painted as in a container, and just it shows you a container as a green. So we don't need changes or anything. We just put a child to this widget and then get it as a green widget in our output. The build method of a set widget is only called in 3 situations. The first one is like when you're running your application and the framework wants to like build your current UI. The first time it uses the build method and your output. So this is the first situation. For the second one, when this widget, like the frog widget, has a parent that changed its configuration, like we have another widget with another properties and argument, and they change their argument, and this build method will be called again. And the third one is like when an inherited widget depends on changes. Like when you have an inherited widget, which we're going to talk about later. When you have an inherited widget and the state of inherited widget change, the dependent children are going to build again. So these are the three situations. The framework doesn't change, doesn't rebuild the widget anytime. It only happens in these three situations. Sub-widget can change like a stream widget, so this is very useful because we actually use the sub-widget to change itself, like the consumer or a stream widget or animation builder. We're going to talk about this later again. And the last point is like when the second and the third option, which are the changes a lot. So we need to isolate the widget which changes a lot and like happens frequently to make a better performance of your application. This again going to talk about after this slide. We have another main widget which is a stateful widget. A stateful is very useful for the mutable state that changes a lot, that you want to change the state, so your application URL change based on the state. Here we have the first example of Flutter, which is for example, the counter that he changes the counter changes call the set state and change the counter. And the counter, if you click that floating action button, it's going to be increased. A state information is information that can be read synchronously when the widget is built. Like you need to have your widget and your state simultaneously. If you don't have the state, for example, we have init state. You cannot call the asynchron function because you need your state as soon as the framework goes to your widget to build it. And you can like make an API call in your init state because framework needs your state at the same time that wants to render your application. So it should be passed to the framework synchronously, and it might change during the lifetime of the widget, which is like, for example, you get out of your application and resume your application. There are many methods to, override those functions. So it's really useful. Notify a state engine using a set state. This is the set state that the function that we want to change our state. There is only one function, and this function can be called during. It cannot be called during like build method. Like if you put your set state here in your build method and framework gives you error, or even after your widget is disposed. You cannot use the set state. For example, if you have an API call but your widget is gone, you cannot set a state because there is no widget in the widget tree that can render. And yeah, that's it. That's much from a stateful widget. We have the performance consideration if you want to use the stateful widget. It's better to not use it, first of all, because a stateful widget gives you the opportunity to call every time set a state, and this is not a really good performance because if you use set a state many times, your application rendering is going to be high, like frameworks need to render it every time, and it's not really a good idea, but only you can use your stateful widgets when you want to have a UI only, for example, animation, the progress of animation, or I don't know, the navigation bar selected, which navigation is selected right now. You can use the stateful widget. But any other situation, it's better not to use it. And if you want to use it, push the state to the leaves. Like, for example, if you have a big tree and there is a parent that changes itself a lot, so put this parent as a, isolate this parent from the sibling and just put it as a leaves. So it changes itself, not everyone else. The third option, if a subtree does not change, cache the widget. For example, if you have a widget like, I don't know, an icon or something, just use the final or const method, const function, to just reuse it every time you want to use this icon. So Flutter cache this icon to the, it caches and then it doesn't rebuild it again. So it's again a good performance consideration. And if you also change your depths of your tree, again Flutter rebuilds your application, rebuilds your widget, your current widget. So if you have an if condition or something, you can just not use the if for the, if you change your length of your widget tree, it's going to rebuild, so better to avoid to do that. And in general, I told you like not to use a stateful for the better performance and keep using in only some situation. I want to show you some example for the bad structure and the better structure. Okay. This is our, the example of Flutter. For example, here we didn't use the const. Because my homepage can be const and Flutter can cache it. And here, if you go to if we have two floating action button, let me run this application. Doesn't run. Okay. So we have two counter, like the green one and the red one. What we did, the first bad structure is like we use the stateful widget with two set function, which one of them increase the green one and the other one increase the red one. So if we click the green one, it's going to increase the green, and if we click this one, the red one is going to be increased. So we use the set. What is the bad structure here? If, for example, we increase the green one and we use the set state for the red one. So everything will be rebuilt. So we don't need to, for example, this green one is not related at all to the red one, so we need to separate these two widgets or use another method of which Flutter gives you. So if you click the red one, the green one also will be rebuilt. And because we're using the set function and we don't use the constant or final method, this is the bad structure. What is the better structure is like, first of all, use the const and then const keyboard. And then we use the value notifier, which I will discuss about the notifier later. So we have the value notifier for the green one and the red one. We don't use the set here. We just change the value of the notifier green one and the red one. And what we do here is like we use the value listenable builder. This listenable builder is not related to the parent, which is the homepage asset. It only changes itself. For example, if you click the green one, you call this function, which is the green notifier, and you increase one value, and you are listening to the value of the green one notifier, and it shows you the green one. And this is not changing anything. It doesn't set aside the whole widget, so only changes only change will be applied here, and it shows you the text of the notifier. So if you have any question, just let me know. If you don't understand this or you may have a question, we want to like a little bit interactive way to let you understand this code properly. So let me know if you have any question. So this is better structure because we don't use the set state and we don't rebuild the application which doesn't related to each other. So if I click the red one, it's going to increase the red one, and only the red listener will be rebuilt. And if I click this one, it's going to be rebuilt the green one. So nothing is related to each other. This is a better structure. So for the performance, it's better to use this function or avoid using set stateful widget or set state. We have inherited widgets. Sometimes we want to use the parent data, like the colors we have here, and we want to use it at the descendant child, like which color I want. Do you have the parent? And you can use the inherited widget, and you can access the color from the bottom to the top. So this guys is for the propagate the information down to the tree, and you can use it. For example, if you use the theme of the framework, the Flutter framework, it's really, it's a simple notifier, inherited widget, which is themed out of context, and you can use the theme of your application. And if you want to get the information, you can also use this method, which is really hard to pronounce. So when the inherited widget reference, the consumer of the inherited widget which rebuild the inherited widget. For example, if the color it changed and you tells the framework which is like, if I have another color, you should rebuild yourself or anyone that's depend on this color. We're going to talk about this with the code. So for now, inherited widget is useful for accessing data to the parent. Here we have the page, and we have the student state, which has a grade of the students. And in the grade widget, we want to use the grade of the student state, because actually this is our state, and we don't have the grade in the bottom. We have the grade in the top, which is our state. So we define our class like student state except inherited widget, and we hold the state in the top, in the parent, and we call the function student state a static function, which is the result if we have depend on inherited widget of exact type of the student state. If we already, for example, if we put our student state in the top of the parent in the my page, we can access from the context of that to use the grade. So, and also I told you if we have our grade changes, you should rebuild yourselves. So we should override this function, update should notify. If the old grade is not equal to the new grade, you should notify yourself and rebuild yourselves. So if any other widget change this state or change the grade widget which use the state of the student state will be rebuilt. So we can access the student state from the student state.of context. We also have, again, performance consideration. For example, here we have two stateless widgets. The first one is the widget one, which is wants to, change the grade And whenever you change the grade, the whole widget will be revealed. So anything related to inherited widget, which stateless widget 2, also will be revealed. So, but stateless widget 2 is not really depend on the grade or anything else related to the inherited widget. What we should do is like separate the estate's inherited widget with its own dependent children and separate the other one from material app to the isolate, from the other which repeats themselves many times. This is better performance. No one's changed anything else like useless changing or anything else. So you better to isolate anything from the widget that repeats itself many times. So what is asset management? Sometimes we want to use data across our many pages or we want to use, for example, a state of login of the user for our shopping cart. This is our example here. Like, for example, a user log in your application, and then they want to add the product to the cart, and then they want to pay. So here we have many estates, and we want to manage this estate because we want to access the login estate, we want to access the cart estate, and we want to add some item to your cart, or then after all we want to check out your products that you want to buy. So we have many estates we want to access across many pages. So we need to have a estate management to manage everything together. We have ephemeral estate and app estate, application estate. Ephemeral estate are the estate which are used only in one single pages, or if you want, you use your estate in many other pages or anything, you have the application estate. So it's really simple, not that simple, but if you have, for example, if you have a current page of the page view, you are not going to use the current page in many other pages. You have your widget page view, and you use it only in one page. So you don't need this data in anywhere else, or even the progress of a complex animation or current selected tab in button navigation. You don't need to know what is the current estate or anything related to this, but you want the user login authentication for your application. In any page your user is logged out, you want to know if the user is logged in or not. For example, the token is expired, or backend says like you need to kick this user out from the application for some reason. So you need this for everywhere. So this is your application asset that you need. For the ephemeral asset, you don't need to use asset management. You only simply use the assetful widget. But for the other asset like application asset, you use the asset management. So this makes it so simple. Like if you don't need asset management, don't use it. You don't need to make it complex or anything in your application. So only use asset management when you want to use your data across all of your pages or some pages. The first asset management I'm going to talk is the change notifier. Change notifier is included in the Flutter SDK, so you don't need to add any other packages. You only use the change notifier in your framework, and just is a simple and straightforward to use for the simple situation like theme localization, or anything that you can handle. It so simple. You don't need to worry about anything else. Here, let's just make an example of, again, the shopping store. You want to add product, and you want to remove product, and you want to check out the cart. The change notifier state is a cart state. You create a class of extended of the change notifier. You have your item, which is your cart. You have to make it this as a, private. If you put the underscore before your variable, it's going to be private. So no one can access your items here from other classes. You want to have your own add method and remove method. So what we do is like whenever we want to add anything in your cart set, we use a function called notify listener. If you use this function, Flutter framework knows that your application needs to be rebuilt, and then it rebuilds itself like the widget is consuming the cart set or listening to the cart set. So in only these two situations, you need to rebuild the widget which is listen to this cart set, the add method and the remove method. And you don't let the other classes change the items, because if you change items, I don't know, if you use the items like add method, it's not going to call the notify listener, so your application is not reviewed. We have the scope, which is extended inherited notifier from the top. We put it as, your parent. Which holds your state. This is the function that we use in inherited widget, and you can use it in your parent. And then if you want to use your scope, like to access your data, you use the cart set scope dot of context, and you can add any item or remove any item. We're going to have a simple example of this, but before that, let's talk about this one and the provider. Also, if this is your cart widget, which first of all, you need to, for the change notifier, you need to listen to the cart set, and you have to mix in your change notifier to this widget. If you don't do that, it's not going to be revealed. So your cart set, you first define your cart set and then call this method as listener. So put the notify listener whenever the cart set changes, for example, add method or remove method, it's going to rebuild the whole widget. So, and don't forget, if you want to get out of this widget, you have to call the remove listener in the dispose method. So the resource will be free. And then if you want to access the total price of your cart, you can access with the cart set scope of context. We have some advantage and disadvantage. The advantage is it's really simple, and it's within your framework. You don't need to add the package, you don't need to do documentation. It's all in the framework, and it's really suitable for the simple and small feature like I mentioned, like theming, navigation, localization, or the font. But we have the disadvantage. It uses the stateful widget, which I mentioned. If you use the stateful widget, doesn't have the problem, but it lets you to use the set function, which is a really heavy function. It has a lot of boilerplates, like you have to listen to the function, listen to the class, or remove the listener, and everything else. So we have one solution which using the provider. Provider is the simple and it's suggested by Flutter team. I don't know if it's deprecated, but before it was suggested. But the new version of provider is is released, and Jhin is going to talk about that. But the provider itself is a simple package that you can use for the state management. It's wrapped around the inherited widget, and you don't need to worry about the resources that you listen or the remove listener to dispose. It does do the job itself. And I don't have time. Let's but it's the only disadvantage is like it's really hard to implement the design pattern or architecture. Let's talk about this one in the example. So I have 5 minutes. This is the change notifier. For example, we have the card set here, which I told you, like we have the notify listener in the add method or the remove all of your card. And we have the scope, which is the inherited notifier. And in your widget, you have to mix in your stateful widget with the change notifier, and then you add your listener and everything together. This is the simple, as same as what I told you. And here we have the 3 button. Like if you click this one, it adds a phone to your card. And if I click this one, it adds the laptop. And if I click this one, it removes everything. So we have 2 functions, like add product. Simply use the cart state dot add the item with the name, and the remove for product just remove everything from your state. And in the build function, we have the product name, which is holding this name, the phone or the laptop. So if you want to access from your child to your parent state scope, you can simply use card state scope of context. If it's empty, you just say nothing. And if you have item in your card, just show the name. But for this one, we use the resources and we remove your resources whenever it disposes. But here we use the provider here. You don't need to mix in your package or anything, or use the stateful. Use the stateless widget. You don't need to do anything else. Just you need to only need to provide. Just call the provider and your state here. And that's it. You can use everything here, and you can access your data with the consumer. Consumer is another widget in the provider package, and it changed the state whenever it changed the card, whenever the state has changed. And you can use simply by the consumer and the card here. You can use the card item.last button. So it's better to use provider here because it doesn't have the boilerplate. It's a simple packaging, and it's a simple for the state management and everything. So you don't need to really worry about the resources whenever I should remove the listener or anything. So this is really simple and easy, but also using the change notifier, it has its own advantages. Like it's simple, and for some use cases, you don't need to use your another package. So design pattern or architecture, the most goal of this is to use, to separate the data model and the view model. So why do we need to separate them? Because if you put everything together, like the view model and the data, is going to be mess. You don't understand your code. You can't read your code. You don't really understand what's going on in your widget. So whatever, I mean, you can also do that. I mean, put everything together from the init state and using the set state. But it's going to be a really messy and a dirty architecture. Again, it's more comprehensible business logic. You know when you have to call the API, when you use your, I don't know, local data or anything from your shared preference. You can separate the feature to simultaneously programming. For example, if you are 3 developers or 2 or more than 2 developers, you can use the provider or the packages asset management to, like, one of them works on the one feature and the other one implement the data logic or the business logic. It's really simple that you can work together. You can using the reusable components and its high scalability, you can write tests more easily, because if you don't separate your data model from your view model, you cannot test your code even, because if you want to define your widgets in your test method, it's going to call the API and it's not happen. It's not going to be pass the test or fail the test, because you don't know what's going on in your widgets. Then the only norm for your, using the asset management is based on your business requirement. For example, it's no matter what you choose, the provider, the BLoC, or anything else you want to use. The things you have to consider is your speed. For example, if your employer asks you for I don't know, 1 week of application or something, you cannot use the BLoC, because BLoC is going to be really big programming. You have to have your state BLoC, listener BLoC state, and everything is going to be really a lot of work. So you cannot really, give your employer the feature in 1 week. Based on your scalability, if you don't have much user, or if you don't have, the international user or anything, for example, you don't need to have the localization, you don't need to add other features, so you don't need to use another package for that. Performance and everything are really depend on your choice and what design pattern you need to implement in your project. So these are the main factor of your decision to use the design pattern or the architecture for your application. So it is not our choice to whatever we decide to use the BLoC or the provider or Riverpod. So it is really depend on the situation that we are working in the company. For my presentation, the only resource was flutter.dev. We aim to use the Flutter documentation as much as possible, because the Flutter documentation is the best resources for everyone, and it's really makes it easy to comprehend the framework and everything. So it's better to have the framework documentation in our event. So that's it. If you have any question or anything related to the introduction, let me know.
You like to do so. What you presented here suggests a situation where Flutter, this particular case of inherent widgets and stateful implementations will only apply to the most simple cases. I'm going to give you a little bit more complicated situation where certain inherited widgets are accessed very frequently, and then you have a hierarchy of widgets that are accessed less and less frequency. Is it possible to nest the updates in such a way that you can optimize performance? Because unless you can do that, the applicability and the range of implementations that you can address is very limited without compromising significant performance. Thank you.
What's the question? Sorry.
The question is there a way to nest? Is there a way to nest your updates, the updates of your inherited widgets, in such a way that you build a hierarchy of states that are accessed very frequently to those that are not, and therefore you don't have to update those that are not, but everything in between, everything in between gets updated. Is there a way to nest that in order to optimize performance? Because if you can't do that, you're going to compromise performance significantly, and there'll be a very limited range of applications where we can use this architecture.
Yes, we haven't, mentioned any architecture here. Just we only use the simple one in this presentation, at least. So Jhin and someone they are going to talk about the architecture. But as your performance consideration, first of all, we don't nest many things. First, if you are in a page 1 and you are going to the page 2, the page 1 will be disposed in the widget tree. So you have your only widget, your page now your second page. So the page 1 is not in your widget tree. So we described a little bit more about the widget tree and the element tree in our previous events, but make it simple. It's like whenever you go to another page, the whole page 1 will be disposed in the widget, and the only thing you have to worry about your performance is your widget, page 2. So, but also it's really important to don't use the set state or repeat anything redundantly. So it's really better to isolate the widget which doesn't relate to each other, and that's it. You don't need to worry about your page 1 or other pages.
So you can essentially, I suppose, qualitatively select those widgets that are, use frequency, and then you can isolate those.
Yes.
And if your application evolves, then you can change the list of widgets that are
absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So we don't have time, so we have our first break. You can enjoy the pizza again, and after 10 minutes, please come back here. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a soft drink and beer, so enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Voilà, la dernière fois qu'on était à c'est pour ça qu'il a mis le break. Je pense que c'est pas la peine. Ouais, je pense que je sais même pas pourquoi. En fait, il y a trois présentations. Il y a trois présentations. Je peux avec ça peut être. Je sais pas trop.
Les applications. Oui, les applications systématiquement.
This one and the question.
The statemanagement? Yeah, I don't think so. It's just maybe some people here are really new to Flutter, so, but it's a second presentation, so you cannot redo the same thing as the first one. It's no.
No, but you cannot do only introduction. You have to go forward.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm thinking like they're going to talk about Riverpod Unplugged. Everyone's going out of mind.
Don't worry, I like it.
People are here for your face.
I think it's not so difficult to understand this because it's similar to other state management, like Redux in React, for instance, or other stuff.
Yeah, but that's if you did. I did. I lost my motivation.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's okay. Don't worry.
Also, you feel that there's no Flutter context, general context.
No, I mean widget like state management.
Yeah,
If you don't use it,
I don't know because I didn't.
Well, you can have the observer pattern.
yeah, exactly. Also, you keep everything.
Yeah.
Flutter
But then you-
dispose the listener.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
the word state management is more similar to web.
and it's thanks to the
more related to web stuff.
The performance is good in Flutter.
Really?
You don't see that much.
Yeah, because
Even you
other
But which is good in Flutter, it's you can override dispose, and dispose is something that nowadays language doesn't have. Only C++ have destroy and nothing else.
Yeah.
And now you can override something that is destroy and already stop it. Okay, we change the pages.
Il n'y a pas de notion de state management.
T'avais pas d'observer pattern.
L'observable, oui, mais en dehors de ça, on a tu n'avais pas le terme state management. Ça, je dis que c'est un terme qui est plus focalisé, enfin, utilisé par les gens qui font du web. Pas ce terme.
Web.
Oui,
Moi, je pense que c'est plus.
Yeah.
Non, ouais, aussi.
Mais bon,
Tu l'as. En JavaScript, tu l'as par exemple. Avec t'as une librairie qui s'appelle Redux, en JavaScript. Et cette librairie-là, c'est vraiment pour faire du state management. Peu importe que tu aies du React ou même de Java. Ce qui est bien avec cette librairie, justement, c'est que tu peux placer ça partout, en fait, parce que c'est du JavaScript pur. Donc ça s'intègre à tous les niveaux. Parfois, moi, j'ai commencé à entendre ça, je vois pas, j'ai quand même, parce qu'à la base, je faisais de l'embarquement. C'est là où j'entends beaucoup le terme state management.
Redux.
Par Redux, en Vue.js, tu as Vuex, mais au final, ça fait du Redux, c'est juste que la syntaxe est différente. Et en Angular, je sais plus ce que tu as, ça porte encore un autre nom, mais globalement, c'est toujours la même chose. En gros, l'idée, c'est toujours de dire, je vais déléguer la gestion d'état du programme, entre guillemets, à une autre couche, pas la couche UI. C'est toujours une couche à côté. Mais c'est plus là où j'entends ça, c'était en dehors du web, j'entends pas ça. On l'utilise pas du tout. Ça peut être l'observable mobile. Parce que Flutter, tu vois ça parce que Flutter c'est mobile premièrement. Mais en dehors de Flutter, si tu as par exemple une conf React, il y en avait même une il y a 2-3 jours, c'est juste utiliser le terme state manager, il n'y a jamais utilisé le terme. Ça arrive parfois, mais c'est rare. Les observables en JavaScript, on t'en parle, mais c'est plus state management. C'est rare.
Donc, state management, c'est vraiment juste le côté notify observers, puis
c'est ça. En provider, le state management provider, tu as un truc qui s'appelle notify listener. Donc, en gros, tu as une classe où tu mets des informations dedans. Et en gros, à chaque fois que tu changes une information, tu lui dis notifie les gens qui écoutent sur ce truc-là, sur telle variable, enfin, qui sont rattachés à cette classe-là, entre guillemets. Donc du coup, ils vont les informations qui sont changées à l'intérieur de la classe, eux, ils vont les récupérer, ils vont se mettre à jour. Notify.
Ben, c'est drôle que tu mentionnes ça parce que j'ai vu ça aussi en Java, mais pas web. Java, juste backend. Okay. La raison pourquoi c'est tout le système de threads, ça fonctionne avec des notifiers. Ça dit notify all that I'm done, ça va au prochain. Puis c'est comme ça qu'ils se séquencent entre eux pour dire c'est ça. Donc je l'ai déjà entendu, mais c'était
différent. Parce que là, dans ce cas-ci, c'est pas un truc de thread, c'est vraiment un truc de comme, bon, mets à jour tout le reste en lien avec ce qui vient d'arriver là.
Ouais, effectivement, c'est vrai que moi, je l'ai pas fait jusqu'à maintenant, peut-être parce que j'en ai pas eu besoin, mais t'as pas de notion de. Jusqu'à maintenant, j'ai pas eu à voir de notion de thread en Dart. Parce que c'est Dart à la base du truc. Et je sais qu'il y en a forcément obligatoirement, parce que Dart a été créé à partir de Java, donc j'imagine qu'il y a thread. Mais comme, tu sais, c'est un arbre de composants, les widgets, en fait, tu sors pas vraiment, en fait. Tu as toujours le même thread. Le seul moment où tu sors, où tu as un semblant, c'est comme si tu avais un autre thread, c'est quand tu fais des appels API. Parce que du coup, c'est asynchrone. Du coup, tu as le temps d'appeler le truc, de créer un autre thread et de revenir au thread principal.
Ouais.
Mais comme en web, de manière générale, on parle pas de thread, on dit juste c'est asynchrone. Du coup, cette notion ne vient pas forcément à tout le monde. Pour quelqu'un comme toi, ou moi, qui avons déjà vu ça pour des langages avec Java, ou des trucs qu'on te demande de faire directement, oui, je comprends qu'il y a un thread, ça change, après tu reviens pour des trucs. Mais pour quelqu'un qui en a jamais fait, c'est marrant. Sinon, t'as trouvé ta plante. Moi, je lui fasse cette expression. Hein? T'as trouvé ta plante.
Ah, bon.
C'est au Québec que tu utilises ça?
Ouais. Non.
Ah, ok.
Pourquoi tu dis ça?
Non, parce que la dernière fois qu'on était venus et qu'on était allé manger, tu voulais savoir comment je peux demander à le sans trop forcer. Je me suis dit peut-être qu'il a trouvé une solution entre-temps.
Ah! Ben non, mais.
Ça change quoi? La formulation est juste différente. Ça change pas. Tu veux dire quoi sur la manière, sur le ton sur lequel tu formules?
Tu sembles plus confiant. C'est quoi ton.
Ah, d'accord.
Qui est quand tu dis ça, parce que je peux.
Mais tu peux pas. Mais t'as pas peur d'y aller au bout, c'est-à-dire que tu n'appliques pas d'abord.
Fuck that.
Ah, carrément. C'est direct.
Fuck that.
Ok. Non, ok, non, pourquoi pas. Non, mais je réfléchis aussi à des techniques parce que je me dis au final, qu'est-ce qui est le mieux en fait? Parce qu'il y en a qui vont te dire oui, moi je préfère quand c'est bold, je préfère y aller vraiment en direct. Il y en a qui vont te dire non, mais moi je préfère quand la personne crée d'abord un mini lien. Et après, petit à petit, il essaye d'aller au truc.
Je te donne un exemple. Hier, j'étais dans un supermarché, j'étais allé acheter des affaires, mes amis étaient là aussi.
Ok.
Je fais je vois la caissière, je vois je le sais parce que c'est pas juste comme un espèce de ah, puis elle regarde le reste du menu, ça va faire ça. Et je me dis à qui il y a plus ça, je sais pas ce qu'il y a.
Ah, ok.
Ouais, il aurait pu dire. Ouais.
Oh, ouais.
Ok, ok, c'est pas mal pensé.
Ouais.
Ok.
Puis, l'affaire, c'est que j'ai pas compris ce qui est arrivé après. Parce que je sais pas si elle n'avait pas de.
C'est étonnant quand même, tous un numéro aujourd'hui.
Ouais, mais je sais pas comment. J'ai en pleine
Qui sort en dessous de 18.
J'ai aucune idée. Si tu sais pas.
En même temps, il y en a qui poussent très vite aussi.
Mais tu sais, c'est pas comme si j'allais avoir une sinon. Donc, je suis demandé. Ouais, mais ça me parle de la fin. Je voulais recevoir la facture par email. Donc, je dis non.
Mais oui, on demande ça souvent aussi au Québec, si tu reçois par email.
Ouais, mais
par courriel.
check. C'est ça l'affaire. Ça devient plus complexe. Mon ami me dit après. Oui, elle m'a dit à la madame avant qu'elle ne pouvait pas recevoir la facture par courriel. Là, je suis en train de penser. Je me dis, ok, mais bon, c'est une décision. Là, t'es comme. Comment je
En fait, c'est le genre de situation où c'est toujours difficile à décortiquer, tu vois. C'est nébuleux.
Ouais.
Et tu dis, vas-y, il faut que je comprenne, est-ce que ça passe ou est-ce que c'est moi qui force, tu vois. Est-ce que c'est moi qui suis en train de forcer pour rien ou est-ce que ça va vraiment passer si.
C'est pas. Tu sais, c'est beau.
Ouais.
Mais après ça, tu sais, je force plus. C'est comme, il faut qu'il y ait quelque chose qui se passe.
Ouais, non, t'as raison.
Donc, J'ai l'impression que ça fonctionne, mais je ne sais pas, à cause de l'affaire de Moi, j'ai pris l'exemple.
Par exemple, t'as pris l'extrême de l'extrême.
Mais moi, t'as complètement l'histoire. Il faut que tu comprennes tout dans un moment que c'est comme il y a du monde qui attend dans arrière.
Restez boudé ici.
Tu vois, c'est ça qui est qu'il a tout dit. En plus, comment t'as géré le fait que potentiellement derrière, il y avait d'autres personnes.
Là, il va falloir faire marche marcher ces ménages.
Ah, ok. So far, you are speaking to understand on your language. No, you're not there. So sure, we can do even a practice session. I was when I was in Korea.
Mais t'as vu c'est justement ça aussi, voir c'est comme vraiment de t'organiser. On n'est pas toujours tout à l'heure. C'est pas moi je suis implémenté en une semaine. Ça c'est chaque fois. C'est un petit compteur là que tu vas utiliser. Moi je suis sur l'application qui permet de t'organiser en fait.
Mais ouais, ce dernier fois, j'ai remarqué on fait un petit peu ça.
Je pense pour s'organiser pour une soirée, un anniversaire, un mariage. Ouais, ça va des événements c'était pratique. Il fallait se dire, c'est la boîte où tu partages des photos. En fait, c'est vraiment tout ça qui a fait.
Non, c'est en français.
C'est un sac de l'utilisation. Non, parce que la base, c'est 3D. C'est vraiment des sociétés de BLoC. Mais
Okay. So we're actually going to start because I only have 20 minutes, so it's going to go super, super fast. So I'm going to be presenting about BLoC, which is a library to do state management. The presentation earlier about if you want to code everything yourself, how you do it. I'm lazy, I don't like to code all that much, so usually I use libraries and I don't try to reinvent the wheel. So my name is Samuel. I'm an Android dev at Transit, and I've been doing Flutter consultant work for the past 4 years. I have a couple of applications in both iOS and Android app stores. So super quick agenda, why BLoC? A couple of core concepts, so you know how it works. There's two things in BLoC, two ways of working, qubits and BLoC. So we're going to see the difference between both. And then a super small demo of a to-do app. All the code is going to be shared afterward. So actually, Jhin and I did the exact same application with two different libraries. So you can go and compare two ways of doing the same thing. So why BLoC? As a developer, as I said earlier, I'm lazy. So what do we want to do? We want to know the state of our application, basically what page the user is on, is the user logged in, what's inside the card, all of that. We want to be able to test our application, test all the behaviors, because everybody here writes unit tests for every single line of code that you write. Right? But it should be easy to test. Even if we don't do it, at least it's easy, and at some point we might do it. We want to record every user interaction, meaning if a user tap on something, add to cart, we want to make sure that we record that the UI is updated. If I click add and nothing happened, then I'm not going to purchase anything. And we want to work as efficiently as possible, so basically reuse as much code as we want. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, code the same thing over and over again, inherited widget and stuff that we saw earlier. And yeah, we want to develop fast and reactive application. So all the performance issue that we heard about earlier, basically we don't want to think about that. We just want a library that does everything for us, and then we just care about the business logic and stuff that actually matters to our business. So a couple of values for BLoC. Basically, BLoC wants to be simple, so you can start very, very small. and improve over time. Meaning that even if you are a junior developer, you just started with Flutter, you can use it. There's a lot of documentation, and it's easy to start with without having to go in super big details and, I don't know, humongous setup. It's also powerful, meaning that if you build a gigantic application, the Amazon application, you could do it with BLoC because it's really extensible, and also there's a lot of advanced features that you can use. It's also testable because, again, at some point we have to write unit tests. When you become a big company and you're successful, you make millions of dollars, you hire someone to write tests for you. So a couple of core concepts. How many here know about stream, what a stream is? Couple. So let me know if what I'm saying next makes sense or not. So what is a stream? You can imagine a river, and then every now and then there's a document flowing down to you, and then there's information on that document. That document basically is async data that comes down from the river, and you get one, you get two, you don't know when you're gonna get the next page, but at some point you're gonna get it, and basically, in our case, that will be our state. So you get a state, at some point that state is gonna change. I don't know by who, I don't know why, but it's gonna change and I need to update my UI. So that's a stream. So now that we know basically super quickly how it works, what is a stream, we're gonna look at the two things I talked about earlier, the qubit and the BLoC. So a qubit is the simplest way of working with BLoC. Basically, you have states that are emitted as a stream, so the river that we saw earlier, that would update the UI, and then the UI can call functions on the qubit to update the state. So you call a function, the state is updated, it's emitted, so it goes down the river, you update your UI, and then you start again, you do the whole loop. So all the interaction goes always in one direction. So we'll see a little bit of code, how you do it. Basically, if I wanted to do a contour application with a qubit, I would define my class. Then I just extend the qubit class. I pass the type of my state. In that case, it's going to be an int. Then I call the constructor. Here you can see that I call super. That super is just to set the initial state. In my case, my counter starts at 0. And then I define as many functions as I want to update my state. In that case, I created one that is increment, and basically it's gonna emit a new state, which is the old state plus 1. That's it. So how do you go and use that? So if you do a Dart application, it will be just, you create your qubit, then you can ask for the state. You can print the state, in that case 0, because it's the initial state. You can call increment, print the state again. Now you have 1. So this is not really reactive. We're talking about Flutter. So how do you do it with Flutter? You would use a BLoC provider. A BLoC provider is basically taking care of creating your qubit at the correct time, so when it's needed, not create many instances of the same qubit. So basically, when your UI starts, the BLoC creator is going to create, so build that qubit once, and then it's the same instance that is reused all throughout the life cycle of that widget and going down. And then you pass the child, which is anything that would need to use that qubit. Then in your, let's say, counter view, you would like to read the state, so you would use a BLoC builder. And what the BLoC builder does is basically every time the state change, this builder is gonna be called, and then you just basically render your UI. It's like a build method, but you get not only the context, you get also the state. So anytime the state changes, your text is gonna be here, 0, 1, 2, 3, blah, blah, blah. So we know how to read the state, but how do you change the state? In that case, let's say we have a floating action button. In the onPress, you would use context read, pass in the type of your qubit, and then you call your method. That basically relies on inherited widget and provider that we saw earlier, but it's all hidden from you. You don't have to think about it. You just use that one-liner, call your method, the states updates. Your text is 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it for qubit. If we go after for BLoC, BLoC is a little bit more advanced. So in the case of BLoC, we still have the state that is a stream of whatever in our counter case was an int, but the event, basically instead of function, it's a stream of events. So that way, basically, when I tap a button, I'm not calling a function, I'm sending an event, and I have a flow of events, basically, that are gonna, again, the flow of event goes to the BLoC changes the state, emit a new state, and then we do, so always the same principle of always going into one direction. So we do the exact same example with the counter, but this time using BLoC. Now I'm extending BLoC instead of qubit, that's pretty easy. And I have a new type here, counter event, and still I have my state int afterward. I still have my super to set my 0 as initial value. So the event basically is the type that is going to be received as the stream of event. So in that case, we create an abstract class, counter event. So all of our event can extend the same class. And then I have, in that case, a specific one, which is a counter increment press. So in the case of BLoC, basically that event, that type, is going to be used to change the state. So what we do in the constructor, we can call the on method and register a function to be executed when that type is received. So in that case, we have the counter increment press. We receive the event and then an emit method, which is the same that we had earlier, emit blah, blah, blah. In that case here, when I receive an increment event, I just say state +1. So the example on the Flutter side will be exactly the same. The only difference is instead of calling a function after we read the context, we're going to add an event. Basically adding an event. In that case, I created a new counter increment press event, and then I just add that. So a big reason why is going to be seen on the next slide. So when we would use one over the other, qubit is super simple. You have a stream only one way, and then you call method, and then you can pass as much data as you want in your method. There's less boilerplate, less code to write, but it's a bit too simple sometimes. When you do BLoC, yes, it's streamed both ways, so it's a bit more code. You have to create the event class, abstract class, blah, blah, blah. You have to do the on. But it gives you the benefit of traceability. That means that you have a stream of events, so you can replay those events, you can undo those events to get the state change. You can record everything that happened. And because everything is a stream, you can use a stream operator. Let's say a debounce timer. So if you write a autocomplete, maybe you don't want to call the server every single time I type a character, because if I type fast, I'm going to send, I don't know, 20 requests that don't make sense. So you can use a debounce on your events and then only record when the person stopped typing. But whichever you decide to use, basically it's super easy to extend a qubit and use a BLoC instead. It's a small refactor. It's not that big of a deal. And then you can basically have the benefit of the BLoC. And I'm going to show you a little bit of code. Yep. I think it can run this. So we always do the exact same demo. Everywhere in the world, you see always the to-do app, super easy, but it gives you a good idea of how things are structured. So I'm gonna show you my version of a to-do app. So there's a text field, you can enter text. Hello. Cool. Every time you type something, hit enter. The item is added to the list, and we have a small filter. Basically, all the to-dos, only the active to-dos, and only the completed to-dos. I don't have any. And if I click cuckoo, it's not active anymore. It's in the complete. Super simple. So we're just going to look a little bit at the code. Put this. So my to-do application, basically, if you can read the code, I have my state, which is a to-do state, and it takes a list of to-do, basically a list of items. Yep. There you go. Mix. Yeah, so that's my state. And then we can look at the event that we have. There's not that many. You can add a to-do, you can update, check, uncheck, and then delete. It's not implemented yet. TBD. And then if we look at the BLoC code, here, same thing as we saw earlier with the example. I have my to-do block, I extend BLoC, I have my event and my state. In that case, the state is not just an int, it's a list of items. And then I have here my on to-do event, and then depending on the type of event, I do something. So in the case of add, if I go down, basically I'm gonna update my state and just add one more to-do. And if I update, basically I find the same to-do, switch them, and then update the state. And I think what we can look is the page. So when we want to read them, as we saw earlier, I have a block provider. In my case, I have a filter to-do block. Basically, it's an extension of the to-do block that allow me to do filtering. So I have the create. I just basically, whenever this is called, I create one instance. And then I have my to-do view. And then inside my to-do view, I did split everything. So if we look at my to-do text field, basically when I submit, I add an event. So basically I create a new to-do, I create my event, and then I call add. And everything's gonna be refreshed. So if we look one last file, which would be to-do list. So in the to-do list here, I read my state, and in that case, I don't want to read the full state. I only need the to-do, the list of to-dos. So I just read that part. So this would come for the question that we had earlier. How do you basically nest and make sure that not everything is updated? So when you read, you don't read the full state, because sometimes the state will be the full page, everything that is shown on that page, but you only care, one widget only care for one part of the state, so you just read that part of the state. So here, I don't care about what is the filter toggle, I only care about the list of to-dos, so that's why I read only the list of to-dos. And my UI is gonna be rebuilt only if the list of to-dos change, not if the filter change. And that's pretty much it. Yep.
I'm just confused about, I'm confused about one issue, and that is with respect to how your events are scheduled in accordance with the ingestion of data from the stream. sometimes the streams can be amorphous and can contain different blocks of data streaming at different rates. How are your events scheduled in order to ingest this? Is each event, how do you say, does it correspond to a specific size or block size of data, or is there a different way to define it? Thank you.
Yeah, so the event in BLoC, when you click on something, that would emit an event. When you receive an answer from the server, that would emit an event. All of those events are collected, and then you update the state with what was needed. So there's no set frequency at which you're going to receive an event. It's not like a timer where you receive every 5 seconds, but it will be on different actions.
Isn't that a little bit inefficient? Wouldn't it be better to, how do you say, to fill the buffer before that stream is updated as an event? Wouldn't that be a more efficient way to approach the solution?
Yeah, so I did show the very, very simple case of BLoC. If you go on the website, actually, I have a resources slide somewhere here. Yep. If you go on the BLoC library dev, there's a lot of extension. As I said earlier, because everything is a stream, you can buffer stuff. You can merge two streams together. All of those are available to use. You don't have to code anything. You don't have to download other library. It's all built in. I just didn't show it because it's a simple example, but they are available. There's a lot of documentation and different examples with way more complex. Yep.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I don't know, can I ask the question in French or?
Yes, French is fine.
Alors, je voulais savoir, est-ce que le bloc a un ensemble d'items prédéfinis? Ça veut dire que le type de structure qui peuvent apparaître à l'intérieur d'un bloc, soit des images, soit du texte, soit... Est-ce que le bloc a un ensemble de paramètres basiques?
So the question is, if I may, is there a finite set of things that can go in the block? Basically, you define the classes that you use, the type that you use for both the event and the state. So you can put whatever you want. Basically, you can put a complex object that contains multiple fields, or you can put what with the counter example, just int, and then it will be just int. So one application is not going to have only one block. So usually you still try to split per feature and stuff like that. So it would make sense, let's say the authentication would be very high in your hierarchy, but only take care of are you signed in or not. And then for your card will be a different block. Not everything needs to be part of one block, so it's easier to reason with, and then you can basically split the application in modules and then have different people work on it. Cool. I'm going to be available anyway afterward if you have any question. The slides are going to be shared, and I'm missing one link about the to-do app. We're going to put all of that on Slack and everything. And Jhin is going to present now.
So hello guys, so my name is Jhin. So today I'm going to talk about the Riverpod. So here is a small introduction of myself. So I'm full stack developer at Unity here. And actually I have side job working with Flutter and then Firebase stuff. And here's the agenda. So I want to talk about what is the Riverpod, and then I'm going to give you some kind of theoretical explanation, and then some practical explanation, and then same as Samuel, I'm going to finish with the application demo. So what is the Riverpod? So Remy Roslet is the author of the Riverpod, and he's one of the famous guy in the Flutter and Dart community. He's the also author of the provide package and freeze. Riverpod is reactive caching framework for the Dart and Flutter, and this another name. I mean the name itself is an anagram of provider package. So Riverpod is complete rewrite of the provider package to make some improvement, meaning that the Riverpod is the successor of a provider. They didn't deprecate provider, but Riverpod is gonna hopefully replace one day. And unlike the provider, Riverpod tend to catch the errors at the compile time rather than the runtime, meaning that you're not gonna see the crash because you made some mistake. So here I specifically put the Riverpod provider there because it's the same name, it's quite confusing. So every time when I say provider from now, it's gonna Riverpod actually. So the provider is an object that encapsulates the state and allow listening to the changes. And this one allows easily accessing to a state from multiple locations, from the provider or from another widget, any part of your code. And this is a replacement pattern of like the singleton, service locator, dependency injection, or inherited widget. So actually it makes it really simplify your all resource bases. So this is how the Riverpod provider looks like, and hello world. Okay, before I go further, I just want to talk about code generation because Riverpod 2.0 introduced code generation, and then this one is recommended, and then, but it's not mandatory. So it's your own choice, but for the make it simple, the presentation, I use code generation, and I also highly recommend to use it. So the benefit of it is it automatically decide and create the best provider. In Riverpod, there's many different providers I'm going to explain, but the code generation make it really simple for that. So code generation itself is pretty common in Dart and Flutter because many different packages may depend on this, like the freeze or JSON serialization and those kind of things. I know some people may not like it still, but because of the complexity or slow compile time or whatever, but static meta programming feature is coming to the Dart, meaning that this will replace the code generation, but you're going to use the same syntax to do the Riverpod 2.0. So this is some example of code generation. So without code generation, so you see you have to remember what provider you need to use, future provider, and then you want to make it auto-dispose or not, and then you want to take parameter or not, that code family, and you have to remember all the syntax. But with code generation, it makes it really simple. So what you need to remember is the function, and then you're going to return type, and then that will be the state type of the provider, and then you just put the parameter over there so that you can take some parameter for the provider. So now different kinds of providers. In Riverpod, there's so many different things. The reason I put the code generation is to make it simple. So those three providers on top is going to be function provider, and then those provider, the another three, is going to be class provider. So you don't need to remember all those kind of provider difference. So here's some example of the provider, function provider. The really basic one, he just initialize repository and then just return it. That's it. So repository is the state of this provider. And next one is future provider. You make the function, you already see this example. So just return the future user, and then you implement the asynchronous function in it. So that's it. Next one is notifier provider. So this one is first example of using class. Unlike the function provider, you see this one can't have the method. So there's a build function that returns the initial state of the provider, and then you can put some mutation method so that you can mutate the state that will trigger re-rendering of the widget or one of the providers. So this one is the example of the asynchronous case. So this one is updating the to-do from the server side, and then how to display loading and so on. So basically it's the same syntax as previous one, but a little look more complicated because of business logic, but not because of the provider. It's the same thing. It's returning the provider state from the build function, which is future list to do, and that's it. So next one is about how to read the provider. So we define the provider already, and then now we want to use it from the widget or another provider or from our actual code, right? So to read provider, we need to have ref object. This one is accessible from a widget or any other provider. And to observe the provider changes, we use watch function. If you use this function in your widget or in your provider, every time the provider changes, it will re-render the widget or provider. But this one is going to be automatic. And then there's another function called listen. This one also observes the provider change, but it doesn't re-render the widget. Instead, it calls the callback function you registered. So you can do something like, let's say, based on the state change, you want to display some alert, or based on state change, maybe you want to make a navigation, some specific imperative code that might be useful with the listen. And then there's another function called read. This one is only reading once, but it doesn't get re-rendered if the state changes. So I don't recommend you use the read in most of the time, but there's a specific case that you can use. I'm going to explain later. So this one is an example of the watch. So I don't know if you can see or highlight the watch function. So there's on top, there's the class provider have the increment mutation method in it. So every time increment code, this gonna re-render. Whatever the widget watching that provider is gonna get re-rendered. So the widget at the below have the watch function on counter provider, meaning that every time increment function is getting called, then this widget is going to re-render with a new value, the count changed. So next one is the typical case of using the read function. So I didn't use to read the state because I don't want to re-render this widget only because of the state change. But I use read here, and then I only call the increment function. So this is typical syntax for the Riverpod. So if you want to call the mutation method, you need to put their counter provider .notifier. Then it will call the increment function of the provider, and every other widget watching this provider is going to get re-rendered. Next one is the example of the listen. Like I explained, this one doesn't get re-rendered, but this one only called the callback function that highlighted over there. So you can put the displaying a lot or navigation, those kind of imperative code can be there. Next one is combining provider. So provider also can be watched from another provider, meaning that it's kind of indirectly you can do dependency injection, right? So second provider is watching the first provider, which is returning the London. Let's say, and then it fetches the weather based on the first provider. So let's say first provider is not a problem, maybe the string can be changed. Then the state of the first provider changes, the second provider is going to re-render, meaning that it will use the new value and then you refetch the data automatically. So this is, I just want you to explain how the provider actually works in it. So let's say there's a widget is watching a provider, then it's going to add in kind of the map. So meaning that before you watch it, it's not even initialized in memory. It's free, and then he now initialized. And then there's next widget is watching the same provider, then it will reference the same provider. So it doesn't cost any more the memory or resources, but using the same thing. And let's say there's a new provider, new widget watching the bit provider, then of course he's going to initialize the bit provider, another provider in the memory. And then let's say bit provider is now gone, disposed. Then provider is going to get also disposed because there's no widget watching the provider. It's the same thing for the A provider. It's going to, the widget watching the A provider is disposed. only one of them. So there's still one of them is watching the A provider. So A provider is still in the memory. And finally, the last widget is gone. Then finally, it also disposes the provider. So you don't need to worry about it, and then everything is going to be automatic in Riverpod. So next step is how to install the Riverpod. There's two simple steps. First thing is installing the dependency. You just copy paste this command in your project, then Riverpod will be installed. And then only thing you need to do in your code is provide scope. You need to wrap with your entry widget with the scope. So meaning that Riverpod is always global scope unless you can. I mean, there's a way of the overriding the scope and so on, but basically you can think this is global. And then you can code, but just before you start code, because of the code generation, you may want to type this command again, so that every time you create provider, modify provider, this script is going to automatically generate the code. And then the demo for the to-do app, probably you already seen it with Samuel's demo. It's the exact same one, but only with the Riverpod. So this demo, I built the to-do app with Riverpod, but I built for the Mac OS. So you can see it's a little different than the Samuel's demo. So the feature-wise is the same thing. T1, T2 is adding it, and then if you click one of them, you mark it as completed. So if you go complete, you have T1 inactive. You're going to have T2 without check, right? So I'm going to open the source code. So let's start with the main Dart file. So like I already, I'll just take it. Yeah, like I already explained, there's the entry widget wrapped with provider scope. And then the entry widget is only rendering the to-do page. So if you go to the to-do page, there's a stateful widget, and then this one has three widgets it's rendering. One is to-do text field, and toggle buttons, and then to-do list. But toggle button here, I just use the stateful widget because this one is only state used in this page. But you can try to refactor to the refactor, and to the Riverpod if you wish. Let's see, for the text field, the code. So this one is every time you type here, let's say, you put something and then you submit, then this function is going to get called. And then you see here, I use the ref read, and then I'm calling the add function, add method, in the to the provider function. So if you see that to the provider, here, a simple provider with a list of to-do, and then let's say add function is get called, then it just add new to-do into the list. Then this widget itself, not this one, this widget itself is not going to re-render because no one is watching this state, but the widget like to-do list, for example, this one is going to get re-rendered. So, but you might notice that the to-do list doesn't use actually to the provider, but instead it's using the filter to the provider, right? So if you see the code a little bit deeper into the provider, this one is actually using another provider, is watching the to the provider. So this is what I explained. You can combine the provider, right? So he's watching the to the provider, and then every time the state changes to the provider, then this one is going to get re-rendered. And then based on the filter parameter he received, he's going to filter and then give it to the widget that someone is watching it. So if you go back to the list, he's watching the to-do provider, you pass the filter, and then to-do list is going to get the return, which is filtered, and then we just render the list view with it. And then this one also have the toggle function calling from the onChange, meaning that every time you toggle, then this part of the code is going to get called. And then this will also trigger the mutation of the to-do provider, the state. So that's about it. And then maybe I can go back to the slide. Yeah, here, I just prepared a little homework. So if anyone wants to get familiarized with Riverpod, I think you can try this one. So you can download source code, maybe adding some feature, or you can refactor the part that I explained about the toggle button using the stateful wizard, but maybe you can try to use it Riverpod. And then you can share your achievement, or you can get some help from the Discord so that we can help you out, or you can show up. Right? And in this slide, maybe later when you download it, I just put some useful links, so don't forget to check this out. One thing I highly recommended is some extension or some Riverpod link, those kind of things. So try out. Thank you. Maybe I can take maybe 2 questions.
Yes, only one thing strikes me. One thing strikes me, you're mentioning how the provider is initialized immediately upon watching, and it seems probably memory is uniformly allocated. Are you going to give us a homework example where we have that dynamically allocated? That would be much more efficient. Is there some extension that automatically does that, or we have to write it ourselves?
No, you don't need to think about anything actually. It's all automatic when, for example, when you watch the provider for the first time in your wherever your code in runtime, then it will dynamically allocate it. So you don't need to worry about allocating or disposing. No. That's it.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Maybe one more.
Hi. Hi. Yeah, I wanted to know the main difference between Riverpod and BLoC. Yeah. That's the debate we've been having since. So I wanted the next part's opinion about.
So I don't want to debate with Samuel for that. But
we'll be debating for that.
Yeah, but I think Ali already explained on his slide. Actually, it depends on use case. So sometimes you want to use BLoC because your business requirement is more the suit with the BLoC. Maybe you are making application better with Riverpod. So my recommendation is you have to try out to see the difference. So if you ask me not to Samuel, I'll say Riverpod is much simpler, but he will say different.
Concerning with regards to the resource consumption, that is when you run, yes, or resource management, when you run both, which one is more consuming than the other?
I'll say that'll be the BLoC and provider list, because they have to initialize first and then you use it, and then you have to manage it to dispose it.
One thing about the BLoC is BLoC is going to take a lot of time for a single feature. You have to define the class event, the state event, and you have to map them together, and it's gonna take you much time. And it's good to have this structure, and I really like this structure, the BLoC structure. But yeah, that's depends on our requirements. If you don't have time, you can do that. If we want to have much more scalability or anything, you can go ahead.
Yeah, there's no good answer until you try yourself. Actually, we're gonna have kind of roundtable after we close it, so maybe you can go talk more if you.
I have an answer on the same subjects. So we've been using BLoC for 4 years. One of the big things that you can't do.
I want to ask you, is it okay to bring.
Yeah, maybe last one.
It's the same topic.
Intelligent question, go ahead.
It's a comment on the same thing, because we've been using BLoC and Provider, and if you're using gRPC server streams or Thrift, when you're using advanced server streaming and you have multiple layers of BLoC is way more appropriate for production use cases for server streams rather than Provider. So if you're using a simple API that is REST, you're much better off with Provider. But if you have more complex use cases when you need many blocks, not just a simple block, for example, a global block and then localized blocks, and those blocks are functioning with gRPC stream in particular, then you would prefer BLoC. Basically, much bigger apps using more advanced protocols use BLoC often, and if I have simpler apps, I use Provider.
Thank you. I'm not going to debate.
Yeah, one more thing about the BLoC is that the best architecture for the BLoC is like to separate your data repository from your BLoC. For example, the BLoC just suggests to is not in my slides, but for example, if you have data from the API or from your local or anywhere else you can get your data, separate them from your BLoC to a repository. And it's also included in the BLoC package. You can use the repository or provider, which provides your data, and then use it as a separate architecture, just not included in your BLoC. In this section, we want to have your opinion about any architecture you are using right now in your professional work. Is anyone wants to come here and just talk about their use cases and their challenges in their?
Maybe let's close first, and then we do until the end of the event. What do you think? We can close first, and then we can, So we're gonna do the round table or whatever. We can invite anyone who knows good, come to the stage, and then we can talk more. But before that, I'd like to close our session first, so that we can continue till the end of the event. Go. So again, we're gonna have the quarterly conf event in April 26th. So anyone interested, join. And then we're gonna have planned for the Google I/O extended. So date is TBD, but I think high chance we're gonna have it. And next month, hopefully we can organize another Flutter meetup. So feel free to suggest any topic, or if you wanna be a speaker, let us know.
I hope it's not raining again.
Yeah. All right, so call for the speaker again, or organizer, reach out to us.
Yeah, just send us message in Discord or Slack, just let us know and we get you a spot.
All right, and there's a small survey we want to ask. So if you guys can do it right now, scan with your phone and then give us some feedback about this event, that'd be great.
Yeah, we will share also the survey link. And if you, for the following events, we're going to have prize for that, but not for this time.
You can also scan on the side. So I'm going to give you another minute. Okay, I think everyone's scanned at least. So while you guys are filling out the survey, I can open another slide. So another QR code if anyone wants to join Discord. And then if you go to the gdgmontreal.com, then you will have other link, Slack or GDG event and so on. So
We might have some events in our Discord server, like I don't know, the voice channel events, like people can like gather together in a Discord server and they can talk to each other, they can like ask a question or have their side projects. It's really a good interaction between the Flutter devs. If you join our server, we can have more events in months, so please join and we have the plan for that.
All right, so I think that's all for today. So I think we can do some kind of roundtable. So anyone knows state management well? I know, Billy, you can come.
Billy, please.
Come.
To tell a story?
Maybe you can introduce yourself first.
Oh yeah, so hi, I'm Billy. I'm developing with Flutter since 2020, 1st of January. I started with provider and I discovered BLoC. So my main use is more make the UI like just showing or loading. When you use, for example, Riverpod, you only have one class and you have the data. But there's nothing for you to mention that something is loading. So maybe the future provider, but using provider, you can using BLoC, for example, you can create a state. So the state can be initial, can be successful, can be failure, but you can also add like loading something. And for example, when your state has data, but when it's loading, you don't have anything. So in Riverpod, if you add in your class, okay, it's loading, that means you can also access to the data, which can be nil or can be the previous value. But using BLoC, you can say, okay, when I'm loading, there's nothing. So you will just show loading. And you cannot access to anything because the event class doesn't allow you to access to the data. So it's a good use, it's a good example of BLoC.
What are your main challenges with your BLoC in your product? Yeah, for example, is it like hard to implement a feature or?
Okay. So I'm using VS Code. So there's a lot of extension. You just right click somewhere and you say create BLoC or qubit, it generates you a lot of things. And also using freeze, it creates you the classes, the copy with the equals, the equal table. So based on just coding, the coding part is very easy. Like there's nothing much to do, but when you have to implement the process, then it's just functions. So when UI side, it's just BLoC builder, BLoC consumer, BLoC listener. There's not much challenge.
Cool. And you want to introduce them?
Yeah, introduce.
So on our end, we've been using Flutter and Go for multi-platform applications. We've been developing our own scaffold, our own backend. We're around 40 developers. And the other name. Oh, I'm Ashley. I'm CTO and co-founder at a digital transformation group in the US, but our lead backend engineer teams are here in Montreal. I represent both teams, front-end and back-end, cloud ops, DevOps. I'm an expert in security, but I was tired of the way people were doing things before, so I built my own methods. And my own methods are mostly based around code scaffolding. So we auto-generate a lot of the code base for front and back. That's how we digital transform faster. And we reduce the cost by having our own layers. So we have our own authentication, logging, tracing, gRPC, so a bit more advanced protocols across all the stack. And we build mostly for gambling, online banking, and on-premise infrastructure for huge groups such as Emirates, and huge on-premise events because they need that for example, payment infrastructure done in 3 months. So that's why we tackle those types of projects. We use a common Flutter code base with BLoC for all the projects. To give you guys like an example, we code gen all our blocks in order to simplify development. We have multiple layers of blocks. Those just have the applicative one, and we have another layer for the framework ones. The framework ones are generally either global, so authentication, logging, interceptors, they're all general to the apps. And then what BLoC allows to do to code faster is to have localized blocks per sets of widgets. So you have sets of pages, they're local, but if you're using global blocks, so for example, authentication, logging, tracing, counters with Firebase, those are all global. So just presenting a bit of a methodology, BLoC can work, but we're mostly using it because of server streams. So why am I talking about server streams? Because once you start getting more complex in architecture, you're going to notice that you have a lot of issues in front end when you're going to have to receive complex events, such as you're throwing a command, which are the most control-based operations. But then in backend, you can have like 1 second or half a second processing for, let's say, if a bet is accepted, if a cart is accepted. And so you have a server stream that pushes when that operation is complete. And that can be made globally available. And so we have like a notification system, and then only you have the read that is performed. So it uses more features of gRPC. It's not like a simple use case. Because we've been using it for a while, so we're using more advanced use cases where if you were taking, for example, simple providers wouldn't work as well, because for that specific element, which is the notification, it wouldn't be efficiently processed by the front end because the front wouldn't always have a context related to it. But because you have BLoC and everything is contextualized in BLoC and every event can be handled asynchronously, it's easier to code then. Otherwise, that type of architecture will make it a lot more complex to be held in front end. So I just wanted to rapidly present the case for which we've been building BLoC. It's a bit more complex, but it's in provision to large backend systems where you have server streams. And that's the main reason why we've been adopting BLoC. Otherwise, that would have been a lot more complicated to handle.
You want to share some advanced BLoC?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, next event or something.
Yeah.
That's great.
This one, I think it's in our share. But the main thing is BLoC simplifies server streams because everything is a context, everything is encapsulated, and even if you use global providers in backend, such as different network connections, it's still processed in its own context. And that's why it's powerful for us, because otherwise, if you have like a delay of 0.5 second, a widget that does its entire set of processing, and then you, in the middle of it, receive another event, you want that widget to still be updated. And that's what we get out of it. So it looks complex, but basically in order to make things more simple for devs, you need a way to scaffold it to make it easier. And we've been doing that for a while. Go ahead.
Yes. And what was your motivation for choosing Flutter and Dot over, let's say, you have so many choices over Erlang or Elm or Elixir or even functional reactive Java? What was the motivation? What advantage did this particular architecture confer to you?
So our framework for Flutter generates clients for web, Android, iOS, Mac, Linux, IoT, and we're working with a previous Google Glass group. So we're also generating for Google Glasses. So all our apps were compatible with all of them. The only problem is Google Glasses are much smaller, and the operations and the controllers are more complex. but we made apps for Google in prototype that were using the Google Glass horrible controller.
Excellent. So you're sticking with that because of the universality of
Yes.
the family. You're sticking with that.
Yeah, because if you have to develop an app in 3 months and support 8 payment methods and a custom, let's say custom integrations in Android, if you haven't pre-built 70% of it, you won't succeed. So that's the reason why Flutter gives you a huge framework to integrate in all your apps. And for us, it means all the gRPC controllers, all the authentication, we reuse always the same things. And so we gain time by doing that. And also because for security, I prefer reviewing my code in advance instead of recoding everything all the time.
What can I ask any question about state management?
Any other question? Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm more of I'm always in the resource management. That is the hardware management. So since you're using like a cross-platform technology, and then you generate apps for many platforms, it's suitable for Android. I think it's suitable for Android. But actually, when you generate the apps for iOS, for instance, how do you manage the resource management that is for the optimization of the resource usage on each device? And then how do you manage for the features to be well fitted and communicate with maybe the phone CPU, something like that directly? I don't know.
So you have to be aware that Flutter transpiles from Dart to each of the platforms depending on the execution mode. When you're in the final execution mode, everything is it's profile mode and a release. So when you're compiling in release, it compiles into x64 for your target Android or iOS, and this is pre-optimized by the Flutter team for you. So it's actually, if you're using correctly your resource, for example, less images is a huge impact. So if you're loading only 50 images per screen, and the context, if it's well used, whether it's web, Android, and iOS, your performance is going to be good. Because that's actually, if you notice, when you code and use Flutter more, that is actually your biggest limitation. It's not the Android-specific code, because Flutter does that part of the job for you. And that's what we noticed as well, because it transpiles, because it uses the Flutter bridge. It's a hardware bridge instead of an emulated bridge like React. That's one of the reasons why React causes a lot of issues, is because of the Babel transpiler and the issues that they have with a React bridge for rendering. The bigger your app goes, for example, in my case, huge libraries, the slower the app gets. But Flutter doesn't have that issue because it tree shakes correctly, and Flutter has simply a more efficient core than React. But that's the reason why we use it. So to your point, we get 80 to 90 to 100 FPS on our transpiled Android apps, only if we have less than 20 images and you're properly using tokenization in backend.
I want to add something like, as much as go the complexity in the project, I don't know, we use the services for the packaging. Like, for example, we have so many features. For example, authentication, I don't know, the user feature or anything else. We can separate these packages from the UI and use in the pubspec.yam and import it as a separate package in our project. And we don't use it in our library folder. Is that how you approach for this? It's a really good idea to have.
So we're using a private internal Flutter repository. So we have 65 Flutter repos. That's how we break down our internal. So we have a public repo, and then we have an entire set of Flutter internal libraries. And by using that next to our CI, we access our own set of private repositories for internal compilation. But I don't think Google recommends that yet, but we don't use normal methods anymore.
Yeah, this is not really normal for each use case, but for the really complex application, it's really better to, for example, separate your UI in your project and just use your BLoC and the data repository as a separate package for your UI.
I think we're also, so you can technically use, I think if you're looking for a large solution, you don't want to have your internal Flutter repository. I think we've been using before that, how is it called, from JFrog. JFrog has plugins for Flutter, and so you can host a bit more easier in JFrog your different Flutter packages and import it once it's compiled for Flutter there, instead of managing your own Flutter repository.
Cool. Thank you so much. This is...
Of course, we're looking for other Flutter experts. So.
Yeah, thank you guys for joining our event in a rainy weather. This is our end of event. Yeah, see you next month or even in the Discord channel for the voice gathering or anything. So thank you. See you later.